Welcome back to A Writer's Mind. I'm Delshri Gladden, and I'm picking up this week with Chapter 6, which I kind of diverged from my plan on what I intended to write when I started this chapter. But that's okay. We'll see where it goes. I think this is another one of those chapters that will eventually get pared down, maybe combined with another chapter. It was a feeling out chapter, I think, of getting to know the character Leon a bit more. So I left off last week with her having observed Leon have a negative interaction with this girl, and him trying to drag her off basically and get her to go with him, and she gets away. Then my original plan had been to get Beatrix, our main character, back in touch with Sarah, who might have a connection to help her meet Arya's parents. And that's still where I want to go. So I think the next section that I'll write tomorrow on Tuesday will be that interaction with Sarah, and then probably a scene break jumping forward to have an interaction with the parents. My intention when I sat down to write Chapter 6 was to make that contact with Sarah, but I got a little sidetracked because with Beatrix being in that first hour class with Ethan and the two girls that she interacted with previously, she has a quick interaction with Ethan kind of as a reminder of like, hey, your sister hasn't contacted me. And she's a little bit more forceful. And it's like, where does she eat lunch? Tell her I'll meet her. So the next part will start with her catching up with Sarah, and it's going to be tough to kind of strike that balance between her not being pushy and obvious to where Sarah's like, what's your deal? Why are you being so weird about this? And finding some level of genuine desire to help and be involved in this effort to find Arya, which is hard because that's genuinely not what she's focusing on. Yes, she would like to know what actually happened to Arya, but her main goal is in talking to the parents and figuring out kind of a little bit more about their home life, because she's already gotten this odd feeling about Leon. And so in this chapter, she kind of has a discussion with the two girls that she met previously, Lila and Kendall. And she brings up that she kind of fudges some of the details, but that she witnessed this interaction accidentally and plays it off as being like concerned. And do you know who that is? Like, who is he dating? And she's actually already done her research and found the girl based on the evidence or the address and all of that. So she knows that. She's dug in some more into Leon's past and discovered some police reports that did not lead to any further action, just like the prom incident. So she's kind of wondering why he keeps escaping any consequences on these, and she's starting to guess it has something to do with his family. So we'll hopefully figure out a few more things in the next chapter in relation to that. I'm still kind of deciding what direction to go with that. I don't want to just have it be like, oh, they're super wealthy and they can, basically pay their way out of anything. Because again, kind of like some of the other things I've put aside as ideas, I don't want it to be the first easiest thing that comes to mind. That doesn't feel very genuine. And so I want to think through, I'm kind of still deciding what is going to be that avenue of him escaping these situations and not either having legal or other types of consequences, even though he has had some consequences on the social level. The information she gets from Kendra and Lila is basically that he doesn't have much contact with anyone at the school. He's kind of kept to himself. And as Beatrix observed, he seems to be expanding his hunting grounds, basically, and spreading things out so he's drawing less attention to himself. So, yeah, still not sure where I'm going to take that as far as what power or play the parents have to keep saving him from his poor choices. But I'll work through that in the next chapter. This chapter, I did end up getting a little over 1,200 words. I think it was 1,242 words for chapter 6. That wrapped the chapter up. But I do kind of feel like, again, like it's a little bit too much talking, a little bit too much explaining. So we'll see how I can adjust that later, especially once I know more about the situation. I think I'll be able to come back and cut and rework some of these chapters better once I have a good idea, which is, just part of the process. I was actually listening to an episode of The Bestseller Experiment, and they were talking to the author of Daisy Jones and the Six, which Taylor Jenkins Reid. And she was talking about how when she first started the project, she tried to write the songs that were going to be in the book at the beginning of the project. And she said, they were terrible. She felt they were really generic and didn't have the depth to them that she was wanting. And so she just jumped in, started writing the project. And then as she progressed through the project, she would rewrite or come up with new snippets of songs that would be mentioned in the story. And that it wasn't until either the end or further into the project, I can't remember which, that she actually sat down and then had to write the full lyrics to the song. And she said she's not a songwriter, so this was kind of a new process. But she was able to do that much better once she actually knew the characters and knew where they would be coming from and what they were experiencing and feeling. And so I feel like that's kind of where I'm at with these initial chapters as well. I don't know these characters well enough yet to really just dive in and write them as who they are quite yet. I'm still filling them out, still figuring out what they want, what their goals are, who they are as individuals. So I anticipate a lot of reworking and shuffling and shifting of these first chapters until I have a better sense. And I think that's something, even if you have something really, detailed and planned out and the character's arc, that still is hard. Because I have done that with some of my books where I've actually done a full outline and plotted them out and all of that. But you can have an understanding of who your character is on a conceptual, logical level, but until you're really in there writing them and getting to know them, you don't have all of those little details in the nuances of their personality and their characteristics and who they are. So I think with any writing project, whether outlined or just by the seat of your pants going for it, you're going to have those things that you're going to have to come back to the beginning. Be like, okay, now I know this character. They wouldn't have said that or reacted that way or done this or whatever it is. So again, I think in those early stages, especially on a first draft, when you don't even know what the heck you're doing with the story, I'm giving myself some free rein to explore in these early chapters, to be too wordy, to just get all my thoughts out on paper so I can go back and adjust them later once I've realized who I'm dealing with and what I need to share with the readers early on. So that's kind of where I'm at for Monday. I'll get some writing done on Tuesday and check back in, see if I can stick to my plan this time of actually writing the chapter I intend to write, and see where that goes. But yeah, I'll be back tomorrow. I am back for Tuesday's report, and this time I got about 1,100, looks like 94 words written. I got through the first section of the chapter, kind of had a scene break after a bit, and then shifted to a new thing, and then kind of looks like I actually stopped in the middle of a sentence because my daughter her choir groups were being honored at the city council meeting for winning state championship this year. So I was actually cruising along and getting a lot done, and then lost track of time. I was like, oh shoot, we gotta go. So ended, like I said, in the middle of a sentence. But yeah, I was actually, I think, staying focused and making some progress a little bit easier than I have on some of the other days. And that may have been partly because I had a plan in mind for this chapter. As I talked about in the last section, I knew that I needed to actually get to that interaction with Sarah. And so that is the first section of chapter 7. Beatrix finally makes contact with Sarah and kind of worms her way into getting involved with the family. And Sarah is a little bit, I don't know if suspicious is the right word. She doesn't really seem to think that she thinks is Sage has an ulterior motive, but she doesn't understand why she would want to get involved and why she wants to help out. So she does kind of question her a bit. She's a little bit standoffish until Beatrix can convince her that Sage really does have a genuine interest in helping. And I actually brought back in kind of the religious aspect with that. I went back to chapter 6 when Beatrix talks to Ethan again to kind of nudge him to get Sarah to make contact. And I went back and added just kind of a little bit of a hint that his family is also religious. When he's offering excuses for Sarah on why she hadn't contacted Sage slash Beatrix yet, he mentions, she had to go to work, and then she had a youth group meeting at church and, homework, she was just really busy and couldn't contact her. So that was something I did go back and add, because it was just like a couple of words, which didn't take long. So I felt like that was something I could just do real quick and not leave a note for myself, because it didn't distract me from what I was doing, and I was able to do that quickly. So I did bring in with this conversation with Sarah, kind of her religious background is a main factor in what's pushing her to get involved. And kind of thinking it's the right thing. My family's been praying for her. I feel like I just feel like I need to do more. And because she's making that connection, Sarah starts to shift and is like, okay, yeah, I guess that makes sense. Because she kind of mentions at the end of the conversation that she's seen Beatrix Sage, as she knows her, as kind of this intimidating, maybe not super great or nice type of person, just observing her from the outside. So this is kind of her first glimpse at what she thinks is the more genuine inner person of Sage. So she buys in. She's convinced by Beatrix and invites her to come with her to the family's house to pick up more flyers that the family would like them to distribute around town and some of the places that she's hung out. And so one of the things that I've still noticed, I think I'm just really going to have to work on this through these initial chapters, is forgetting to include Sage's reaction. Because even though she can't outwardly react, her consciousness is, kind of balled up in this soul trap, and Beatrix can still feel or sense her emotions in situations. And I continue to forget to do that. So that's going to be one of the big revisions of these first couple chapters, is going back and adding those reactions in and using that to help kind of prompt Beatrix in different directions throughout her investigation. Because what I thought about later was the mention of going to places that Arya visits should inspire some anxiety for Sage. And I won't fully explain why yet, because I'm still working that in, but I think that's one of those hints that I can put in these early chapters that will come into play later when I actually start to reveal what's actually been going on with both Arya and Sage and where they've connected. So as I'm getting to know the story and the characters a little bit better, I'm starting to see where some of those hints need to be put in place in these early chapters. Aside from going back to chapter 6 to do that religious bit, I'm just kind of making note of them rather than going back and reworking things right now, because I don't want to spend all my time doing that. At this point, I just need to get through this first draft. So then I did have the scene change and went to the other thing that I knew I needed to get back to, and that was the meeting with the pastor. And I didn't get all the way through this. I kind of just got into the start of their conversation, and I was already feeling that this was going to be a tricky one because Beatrix doesn't actually know most of Sage's history. This was a really rushed investigation. She was dropped into it, and why that is will come up later. But we've already been introduced to the idea that Cal is not super great at collecting the initial information, even when he has plenty of time to do it. And so he's done an especially poor job of getting together the initial dossier on Sage's life, in this case, because he did it very quickly. So Beatrix is trying to talk to this pastor about Sage's past indiscretions, or, in his words, sins, but she doesn't actually know what any of the things are. So she really is trying to walk this fine line of trying to get him to divulge information without making a mistake that will alert him to something being off. Obviously, he's not going to be like, what, you said the wrong day, you must be an imposter. He's just going to kind of well, that's a weird thing. as I go back through this conversation tomorrow, trying to find that balance of her trying to get information while guessing what he expects or wants her to say is going to be a little bit challenging. I'll kind of get through it on this first draft, but I expect I'm going to need to spend some time with this conversation and really focus on what's going to make the most sense and what are going to be her tactics. With her being an experienced investigator, how would she go about this and do it well and do it correctly so she comes out with information that's going to be helpful to her? And so this scene really has some impact as I want it to have. And it's not as rambly as some of these these earlier scenes have been. So like I said, I'll get through this one on the first draft and see kind of where I'm at with it. But I expect to come back to it, especially once I'm a little bit more familiar with Beatrix. I think I'm like getting a good sense of her now, but I still need to get to know her a little bit better and kind of decide what her history is, where her main skills are as far as these investigations, and where she would excel and where she would struggle, because I don't want her to be, just the most super awesome, amazing investigator ever who always makes the right decisions and assumptions and does everything right. She needs to have some weaknesses, some areas where she's maybe not as great as she could be at that. And haven't quite decided what those are yet. I think I may just kind of see where they develop and where maybe her reactions get in the way of what she's doing and kind of build from there once I find those little weak spots as I'm writing. So otherwise, this was actually a little bit of an easier writing day than I thought it was going to be. So that's nice. It makes me feel like maybe I'm starting to kind of train myself to get back into a creative flow, and that when I sit down and I'm ready to write, it won't feel like I really have to work at getting into that creative space. Which is the point of making this a habit, that can switch on a little bit easier and change gears from whatever I was doing before. But we'll see. I'm going to continue to keep going. I'll see if I can finish out chapter 7 tomorrow. All right, back again for Wednesday's progress report. This was actually a really productive day on several fronts. I did get more words written than I was expecting, which is really nice. I was able to write 2,832 words. So I finished off chapter 7 and then got chapter 8 written as well. But more importantly than the word count, I actually made some progress on some of the things that I'd mentioned in yesterday's update that were kind of giving me a hard time, like figuring out kind of where Beatrix is as an investigator, kind of avoiding making her the super investigator, and finding some faults. One of those is as I was finishing chapter 7, where she was discussing with Pastor Trine, which one of the other small thing that slowed me up was realizing that I had been misspelling pastor half the time, with sometimes using an E, sometimes using an O. So I actually had to go Google what the correct spelling was, which is silly because I should have known that already. But anyway, she kind of, blows up the meeting with Pastor Trine. And as that was happening, she starts off trying to play kind of the petulant, poor me teenager that she expects Sage to be, and which the pastor seems to be expecting as well. She's kind of going off his cues on how Sage usually behaves in these sessions. And she's generally kind of on the mark, but she starts to get a little bit off course because of her past experiences. There's a scene or a portion of the scene where she's kind of venting about how the mom treats Sage. And the pastor kind of starts making what Beatrix sees as excuses for some pretty blatant abuse. And this kind of sets off a trigger in Beatrix because she has seen so much of human cruelty over her time investigating these cases. And that kind of just came up as something that she suddenly, couldn't keep her usual cool. She kind of mouths off to him and starts getting feistier to a level that causes him to then push back against her and clam up So she does get some information about some of the things that the mom is angry with her about. She apparently tends to sneak out of the house when she's grounded or not supposed to be out. She's been caught smoking pot a few times. And the mom has found out that she's been sleeping with her boyfriend. So all of these to a highly religious person and to an also unstable person. She's viewing these as, very serious crimes against their beliefs. I guess depending, she's underage, so smoking pot, technically a crime. But, in the grand scheme of things, probably a small thing that Sage is doing that's probably got the least serious significance of some of the other stuff that's going on in the story. So she does get a little bit of information, but when she really starts to get into what might be helpful, like what's the real problem beneath the relationship with the parents and why the mom doesn't trust her and is being so harsh with her right now. She pushed him too far and he clams up and she's not able to get the rest of the information. He kind of ends the scene with telling her, when you start telling the truth, then there'll be some, forgiveness or, things will change at that point. And then he kind of just boots her out of the office at that point and doesn't make a follow-up visit with her. So we go into the next scene with her being frustrated with herself for not having handled that better. And in that scene, there was actually something else that came up that I'm considering kind of making a recurring habit of Beatrix's. When she first meets the pastor, she kind of sizes him up because she is going into a closed room with this man as a teenage girl, which already kind of sets some alarm bells off for her. Again, kind of going back to the things she's seen and been aware of, she has kind of a heightened concern for situations where she's putting the physical body of whoever she's inhabiting into a dangerous situation. So she kind of sizes him up, kind of assesses how threatening he might be, whether this is going to be a safe situation or not. And it's something that for me, I know it comes from reading Jana DeLeon's Misfortune series, and her character is an ex-CIA agent who assesses everyone's threat level when she meets them. And so I don't want it to be like a copy of that, but as I was kind of writing that short little paragraph, it did occur to me that she should be a little bit more observant and sizing people up a little bit more on whether or not they're important to the case, whether they may have been threatening or helpful, or what is their role in the subject's life. I think I may use that a little bit more and go back and put that in earlier chapters, but keeping it focused maybe on their relevance. And in certain situations like that, like, is this a potentially threatening situation? Just because that's going to be a concern with a teenage girl in certain situations. So keeping it more focused on that, less on like, oh, can I take this guy down or something like that. But I think she does need to be more actively observant when she's entering a new situation or meeting someone new. So that's something that I think I'll continue to use in certain ways, and then maybe go back and revise that in the earlier chapters as well. So the next section that I wrote, chapter 8, was going back to Sarah, whom she had agreed to pick up in order to make contact with Arya's parents. And so she picks Sarah up, and they are driving over to the house, have a little bit of some time to bond. Beatrix is being especially careful and sensitive after having messed things up with the session with the pastor. So she's really trying to be aware and cognizant of everything Sarah's feeling and how to guide her toward accepting and trusting Beatrix so that she can get a little bit more information out of her. So definitely not like a completely altruistic approach, but she's not there to make friends. She's there to solve the investigation. So I was kind of debating as I was having Sarah and Beatrix bond and her start to form this. She kind of brings up some information about Arya that Beatrix didn't know before, that they were actually friends, they were in orchestra together, and Sarah is aware of the fact that Arya and her parents had a very poor relationship. So that kind of piques Beatrix's interest of, oh, she might actually have more information than I thought. Her main goal had been to use her to get to the parents, but she starts to realize, like, oh, I need to develop this relationship with Sarah as well, which kind of made me rethink whether Ethan is going to continue to be relevant at all. I had kind of seen him as an opportunity to get a little bit more information, but it was kind of pushing it to make him more of a character, and that just may not really work. So I'll kind of keep him on the back burner and see if he pops up again, but I don't think I'm going to actively pursue making him have more of a role in the story. I'm kind of feeling like there's already too many characters that are going to be recurring and important to the story. So I just may let him kind of fade a little bit and maybe have him as a go-between again here and there with Sarah or something like that. But I think Sarah is going to actually be the more useful character in making sure that things are progressing. So I may focus on her more. Another thing that happened kind of at the end of this, Sarah has kind of prepped Beatrix that she doesn't really like going to the Proust house by herself. It just feels weird to her. She doesn't feel like the parents and Leon are reacting appropriately to Arya being missing. She says, it seems like they don't even care. They're just back at work. They're, just going on as usual. So Beatrix is kind of primed for this to be a strange experience, and she's really on the lookout. So she kind of assesses things more carefully. She's really watching every reaction and movement and is kind of surprised by Mr. Proust. At first, he's, on the phone when he answers the door talking to a client or coworker or something, and really just doesn't acknowledge them, just kind of finishes what he's doing, and then goes and gets the missing posters that they are there to pick up. But it's not until he carries them back and is kind of handing them over that he changes, and something really kind of strikes him looking at the posters, and it becomes clear that he's not as just unfeeling as what Sarah was initially getting the impression of, but he's seeing the situation very differently. And this kind of just came out of nowhere as I was writing, and I decided to just go with it. I had been intending for the dad to just be kind of like, yeah, great, thanks for helping out. Who knows? We don't, no updates, nothing. Just being kind of that unfeeling person. But as I started writing it, that just didn't feel right and didn't seem like a terribly genuine reaction. Like he needed some reason to think this was not as big of a deal as everyone else thought it was. And he's kind of almost in this like dazed state looking at the posters and makes a comment basically that he's not sure if the posters are helping, but maybe Arya will see them and come home. And he says that she's never been gone this long before. And it seems like it's just now, she's been missing for about 2 weeks, that just now he's starting to think she might actually be missing. And this is where Beatrix kind of pops up and is willing to make a move and ask some questions. Because it's clear from Sarah's reaction that Sarah, even though she was a friend of hers, was not aware that this was a frequent thing with Arya, that she would go missing. And I think I'll follow up on that in the next chapter. They're going to be driving back to Sarah's house. And so they'll obviously have a conversation about this, and it'll become clear that Sarah wasn't aware that Arya tended to go missing because she was always at school. And so this is going to be kind of a surprise new thing for Beatrix to start paying attention to and looking into. Okay, how often did she disappear? Where was she going? Was she hiding out with a friend or whatever? Because the dad mentions, like, hey, we've called everyone that she usually runs off to, and, nobody's seen her. And so they weren't taking this seriously. They thought she'd just gotten mad and run off again, even though he claims, like, they actually had been doing okay and getting along decently before she disappeared. But now it's been long enough that he's actually starting to worry. We don't get a sense yet because he's the only one at home. So I'm still thinking about how the mom and Leon are going to be at this point. Are they starting to worry as well? I'm thinking the dad's maybe going to be the little bit more sympathetic person. perhaps Leon and Arya had a more conflict-based relationship, so he may react differently. I'm not sure with the mom yet. I don't want to make her too similar to Sage's mom, but I'm not totally sure where to go with her yet. Whether she's going to be kind of in a similar state as the dad, having originally thought this wasn't a big deal, now becoming concerned. We'll see. Because I haven't introduced her at all. I don't know anything about her as a character yet. So I'm open to her being a different type of person than the dad and responding differently. But I don't think I'll really know what I'm going to do with her until I start writing that. And I'm not sure when she's going to come into play quite yet. I think I need to come up with some sort of reason where they're going to have more of a public event. And maybe the dad is pushing this now that he's really starting to think like, I think something actually, happened. Like something bad has happened to Arya. Like she's not coming back. So maybe they have some sort of public event, and then that's where Beatrix will interact with them again next and meet the other two members of the family. So I'm kind of tossing that around in the back of my mind on how I'll bring them in. But I think with some of the surprises, I wrapped up chapter 8. Chapter 9 will be Sarah and Beatrix driving back and having that conversation. So I think that may be a shorter chapter. But I'm kind of at a point I don't really know where to go next and what I'm going to focus on. So I've got a couple of options. She needs to find out more about Leon. She's got to figure out what is behind her mom's anger. She knows now that she thinks she's been lying. And I can't remember if I said it earlier, that the pastor says she needs to stop lying about where she was the night that Arya disappeared. I think I'm going toward the mom, at least, thinks she was involved with Arya's disappearance, but she has no evidence, so she's kind of lashing out at her over everything else as a way to force her into coming clean about whatever she believes she may have been involved with. So I've got to follow up with that. I think have another interaction with the parents at the home, bring Sarah back in at some point. So I've got a couple of routes I'm going to be tossing around in my mind this evening as I'm relaxing or doing something else or petting my super needy dogs who have been begging for attention all day today, which is why I should have been writing in my room instead of at the kitchen table because they kept interrupting. But they're hard to resist and they're hard to not sit out there and interact with. I'll be thinking about that. Don't know where I'm going to go tomorrow when I sit down to write, but we will see. And I will report back tomorrow on what I accomplished and what other surprises my characters threw at me. All right, back for Thursday's update. So I did get through chapter 9. It ended up being a little longer than I expected, but that's okay. I wrote 1,359 words to wrap up that chapter, so a little bit shorter than some of the other chapters, but that's all right. So this was one where I actually had a plan of what this chapter was going to be with Sarah and Beatrix in the car after having had this weird encounter with Arya's dad, and so they kind of discuss it. So for the most part, it kind of went as planned. There were some more questions that came up as I was writing it, as well as just kind of a few things that tripped me up a little bit. I did actually go to my room/office space and write in there, so I wasn't being distracted by my dogs the entire time. So that did help me stay a little bit more focused, even though I did need to go out as soon as I wrapped up and give them extra snuggles and pets because they were being sad and mournful. It was nice to be able to just focus in and sit and get that done. One of the things that I'm struggling with as Beatrix is investigating, I know generally what she needs to find out. There's kind of this complexity I'm trying to walk the line on of what I know, but I need to hold back until later in the book, and what Beatrix knows, but can't tell the other people around her, and then having the other characters she interacts with pick up on things or share their information and keep the pacing on all of that right. it's been really tempting and kind of hard to avoid this temptation of having Beatrix or someone else figure a few things out too quickly. And I don't want it to feel forced, that like I'm making them seem dumb or oblivious or, something else that just doesn't seem logical or sensible, that they wouldn't figure out what's going on. And I think I'm still okay on that side of it. Like, I think I'm kind of projecting what I know and what I want to do with this and saying like, well, yeah, maybe that would be like their natural conclusion. But then I have to stop and think about it and be like, actually, that would be a pretty big leap in logic at this moment because they have no evidence to support this thing that they're going to figure out later on in the story. So yeah, I'm finding that a little hard to balance, to not let too much out too soon, or to not have them make these jumps in logic to move things along in a way that wouldn't really make sense for them to figure something out yet. Interesting kind of finding that balance there. I am, like I mentioned in the last section, that Sarah seemed like she was kind of going to be taking over where I initially thought maybe the Ethan character was going to be helpful. I got that a little bit more in chapter 9 as they're kind of discussing the strange interaction with the dad and her ability to observe and kind of pick things apart and make some conclusions. She's working really well for that. And so I think I'm going to keep her as kind of this side partner that obviously, like, Beatrix is not going to fully explain everything. She's going to let her keep working on the assumption that Beatrix is Sage, nothing's out of the ordinary there, and Sage is just on some, altruistic kick of really getting interested in all of this. And I think I may need to build in a little bit more reason why Sage would appear to be so fascinated by this, to keep Sarah from thinking it's too weird that she might like back off or not trust or share enough. And I'm debating on how to do that. I think it's not out of the realm of possibilities to just bring in that maybe she is just kind of really fascinated by true crime and mysteries, and this has caught her attention in that way, because I don't want her to try to have to convince Sarah, like, oh, I really, really deeply care about her missing, and I'm just determined to find it out and help her. Because Sarah genuinely was Arya's friend. So that's believable on her side, that she is upset by all of this. She's frustrated and shocked by the parents' behavior, that they're just not really thinking it's very serious. And so I don't want to just kind of double up on that. I think I need to have Beatrix as Sage kind of approach that in a different way. That, yeah, maybe she feels bad that Arya is missing, but she's really just kind of fascinated with the situation more than anything. At least, putting that perception out there. So Sarah has a reason to believe that, yeah, maybe she doesn't care in the same way that Sarah cares, but she's still interested in helping her try to figure out what happened to her friend. I think that will work in that way to keep Sarah realistically partnering with and believing in Sage/Beatrix. Because they just seem to, as characters, they're playing well off of each other, and I want to keep building on that. So some things come up in their discussion after the interaction. They're kind of in the car. Sarah is really upset by all of this, whereas Beatrix is kind of processing all of it as clues and how to interpret things and where to go next and what her next step will be. So they're reacting to it in different ways with the same ultimate goal of understanding why the parents are being so weird and what is true and what isn't true. So Sarah is able to share some details of what she knows about Arya, that yes, she would leave her parents' house, but it was never running away like the dad was making it sound. And like, it seems like maybe he passed on to the police that like, oh, she's just this chronic runaway. Like, this isn't that big of a deal. Because what Sarah shares is that Arya and her parents fought a lot, and she would occasionally leave the family home and go stay with a friend for a couple days or a week or whatever. But like, her parents always knew where she was, and the rest of her life was not disrupted. Like, she was still attending school and clubs and, whatever else she needed to do. Like, she wasn't going off the grid to where nobody knew where she was. So Sarah is confused and angry that her parents are not treating this differently because the way she sees it, like this is a very different situation. Nobody's heard from Arya in 2 weeks. None of her friends know where she is. She's seeing this as a very different situation than her reacting to a fight with her parents and needing to be away from them for a few days. And so Beatrix is kind of taking in this information and what Sarah knows, and she's kind of piecing together that, yeah, she's also finding the parents' reactions strange, but she thinks that this is like a genuine misunderstanding on their part of like, yeah, she ran off and she's taking it to a different level than before, but like she's still fine. She's still going to come home at some point. And she's interpreting the dad's reaction as he's just now starting to think something may be wrong. Like, I think we may have misjudged this situation. So she's kind of believing the parents a little bit more than Sarah is, where Sarah, already had these preconceived opinions of them from what Arya had said, that they're just mean and uncaring and kind of hateful toward her. So Beatrix is having to kind of sift through Sarah's thoughts and emotions that are playing into how she's reacting and interpreting, and just taking the facts a little bit more to try to understand them. And then Sarah does provide some other information that's more kind of a guess on her part, that yes, her and Arya were friends, but she kind of says, I think there was someone else that she would have confided in more than me. They're friends they're in orchestra together, they spend time together, but not like best friends. Like they're always with each other. And so she's just kind of had this thought or belief that Arya had someone else in her life that she wouldn't talk about. And she says, I think it was because her parents, would have not approved of whoever this person is. So they kind of run through some ideas of why her parents might not approve of someone. Is it an older man? Is it someone dealing drugs? Kind of running through those things, and just nothing's really quite fitting with everything else that they know. And it's Sarah who's kind of the one who, after they dismiss a lot of their guesses, says, well, what if it wasn't her parents who would have been disapproving? What if it's the other person who had to keep this friendship or relationship or whatever it was? It's the other person who has to keep it secret. And Arya was keeping that secret. And that kind of strikes a note with Beatrix and sets her on the next stage of her investigation, which Sarah doesn't really understand. She's like, well, if we don't know who it is, how is that helpful? And Arya kind of close out the chapter with her saying, like, well, we need to look for who's not there. Who didn't show up, who isn't helping with the investigation or searching or whatever, who would be at risk of some sort of damage or hurt if it was found out that she was hanging out with Arya. So there's still a lot for them to fill in there, but it gets the investigation turning in the direction I want it to go without having to give away too much information too early, because we're only in chapter 9. I'm just at barely over 16,000 words on this, and I'm shooting for ultimately, I tend to write too long and be too wordy, so a lot of my books in the past have been 80, 90, 100,000 words, and I'd really like to keep this a little bit more concise. I'm undecided on what publishing track I'll take with this one, but I do want to keep in mind that on the traditional side of things, novels in general, not always. The Book of Love was like 800 pages or something, and that was traditionally published. So there's always exceptions, but a lot of trade fiction is skewing a little bit shorter, so I want to kind of aim for around 80,000. And I know these first several chapters I'm going to end up cutting quite a bit and getting it down to a more concise level, so that 16,000 will shorten at some point. I know I'll come back and trim this later, but I want to make sure I'm keeping things moving and keeping it interesting without jumping to, like I said earlier, those kind of illogical leaps in understanding or knowledge or figuring things out in a way that doesn't make sense. So that's kind of where I'm at as far as things that are challenging me a bit, aside from other silly little things that I wasted time on writing today. For some reason, I could not remember the concept of like the simplest answer is usually the right one. And I was just sitting there staring. I'm like, what is that? Why can't I remember what it is? And I was like, Schrodinger. And I was like, wait, no, what does that have to do with Schrodinger's cat? Like that. That doesn't make sense. That's the other thing of things existing, like both outcomes existing at the same time. So I had to sit there and I'm like trying to remember what it is. And one of those things where like you waste time because you don't know what question to ask because like in Googling something because your brain's just not working. And finally, after spelling it wrong the first time and then finding the correct spelling, I was like, Occam's razor. Oh my gosh. Yeah, so silly, simple things like that where I can't remember what the heck it is I'm trying to remember slowed me up a bit. But otherwise, I think got through a fair amount in that. I think it was a little over an hour that I wrote yesterday. It was probably more closer to an hour and a half earlier today, which was nice. But I have my new path for where we're going to focus on who they're looking for in this absent person to figure out where to direct her attention next. I'm still looking forward to another sort of like public interaction where the three members of Arya's family are all in one place. And then I need to have another interaction with the parents, with Sage's family in the home. And then I'd like to get back to her having another session with the pastor at some point. I feel like I also need to bring the boyfriend back in. It's been a little while since we've had an interaction with Kendall. So I'm not totally sure where chapter 10 is going to go. I'm still debating where she's going to turn to next in these different pieces and parts that I need to put together. We'll see what I end up with when I sit down to finish writing tomorrow. All right, well, I am back to wrap up the week of writing. Yesterday, I finished off with the conversation with Sarah and Beatrix, and I was contemplating kind of where to go next. And where I landed was I wanted to touch back in with her family life with Sage's parents before jumping into any more of the friends or the rest of the outside investigation and focus back in on Sage. Because I feel like I've spent a lot of time looking into Arya and Leon and kind of the external things, and she hasn't put as much time yet or hasn't had enough opportunity to really dig into kind of what Sage has been doing and whether Sage is at fault and where she kind of plays into this investigation. So it ended up being a short section. I'm debating just leaving it as a complete chapter because it only ended up being about, 1,057 words was what I got done today. And that is pretty short for a chapter, but if I add more to this section, it will just be padding and filler. I think I got out what I needed to get out in this chapter, and I don't really see transitioning with a scene break to anything related enough. So I think this is just going to be kind of an oddball short chapter, but I think it just needs to stay that way for now. So we'll see. So I did have her go back home, and her parents like to be confrontational in these settings. So her dad is sitting there waiting for her. And so this time she's having an interaction with the dad because I didn't feel like we'd gotten much of a sense of him yet, other than that he's pretty demanding, controlling with the kids as far as their grades go, and he seems to kind of leave most of the rest of it to his wife, to Melinda. But I wanted to make sure that this is kind of a balanced approach with her parents, that they are both creating this situation that Sage and her siblings live in, that it's not just, okay, mom's unbalanced and dad just kind of lets it happen. Like they're both active participants in how these kids are being raised. And I wanted to focus back in on the religious aspect of it, because we kind of left off with the pastor of him kind of making the comment that, you know, your mom's not going to trust you until you tell the truth about where you were the night that Arya left. So Beatrix kind of went away from that thinking the pastor knows something's up, the mom knows something's up, and she assumes that the dad does as well, because they are typically kind of a united front on the way they treat Sage. So she kind of goes into this conversation with the dad where he is being immediately confrontational with her when she goes back into the house and starts kind of making these accusations and bringing more of the religious side into it, because they've kind of gotten this report from the pastor that, yes, she showed up for the meeting, but it did not go well. And so he's confronting her about that. And basically it goes very quickly into, you need to confess. If you don't, you're going to hell, really putting a lot of that pressure. And Beatrix, as Sage, fights back against that on some level, while also trying to get the dad to give her more information about what's really behind her parents' anger and hostility toward her. I struggled with this chapter, which might be partly why it's so short. I was having a hard time kind of finding my footing on how the dad was going to approach attacking her and basically trying to like bully and beat her into submission as far as their religious beliefs. Like, obviously, she's not fully on board with their belief system. She's rebelling against it. And his response is to just push harder, threaten, just try to force her into believing what they want and acting in the way that they want. And I started to go down the route of like it becoming a scripture battle and her kind of throwing back in his face what she'd said about her mom earlier, that her mom picks and chooses which of her religious beliefs she follows. And I kind of spent too much of the hour looking into that and trying to find specific scriptures that I felt like would work. And some of the ones I was thinking of were Mormon scriptures in their canon of works, which wasn't going to fit. Even though that's the religion I'm most familiar with since I was raised Mormon, I don't want to cloud this story with the intricacies of Mormonism. I have a different project I'm working at in my head at this point, just kind of trying to figure things out and doing some research on that will play with some of those tenets and take that in another direction. It's an idea discussing some of those things with my boyfriend Chris that he came up with, and he's eagerly waiting for me to pursue it. So that's on the list. Maybe that'll be the next season of this show if I can ever get through this rough draft first. But so I didn't want to mix Bible scripture with scripture from the Mormon works, because that's just going to be confusing. And like, Mormonism takes a lot to explain to people who are not familiar with it, and I don't want to take the time to do that in this book. And I still haven't decided what specific religion her family belongs to. I'm leaning toward like Southern Baptist, just because that can be a belief system that's a bit more harsh and unforgiving, at least I had a lot of friends who were Baptist growing up. And so I have some knowledge of that belief system and kind of where that mindset might be coming from. So I'm leaning toward that, but I haven't fully decided. And I think because I don't have an exact framework on their belief system yet and what religion that is, trying to work in scriptures, even though I think that could be interesting, it's a little too nebulous right now to narrow that down. And so I think that may be something I come back to eventually and insert in as I'm doing revisions. I don't know. But for one, it was taking too much time to try to find just the right verses to use while I was trying to get through my writing time, which was just, like I said at the beginning, I really want to focus on the writing during the hour that I set aside and not research or revision or anything like that. So we'll see if I come back to that once I have a better sense of like the exact details of their belief system. I may pursue that when I'm more in like the revision stage. But I decided to just kind of forego that for now and just focus on just the ideas of, confession, repentance, forgiveness, and the ultimate state of the soul for not repenting, not falling in line with a belief system, and kind of making that the focus of their argument rather than really getting into those nitty-gritty details. So she's kind of semi-successful in getting more information out of the dad. I'm kind of up against that tricky balance of, I know where this is going and I know what is eventually going to need to be revealed, but it's not time to make some of those revelations yet. So kind of walking that line of like giving little bits of information to the listener without overdoing it, giving too much, giving away things that should come out later. So where I kind of settled with this one is that she brings up kind of the things that she's already confirmed of her, sneaking out, smoking pot, sleeping with her boyfriend. And she brings those up to kind of get him started, like maybe set him off, and hopefully he'll just be like, yeah, that but he doesn't really take the bait. He is more focused on just really pushing toward, you need to confess. This is your soul. You're going to end up in hell. He just keeps coming back around to that. And so she kind of takes a different track toward the end of the chapter where she kind of pushes back and says, you keep talking about confessing. You don't really care about my soul. You don't want anyone else to find out what was really going on. And she brings up, you just want me to tell you where I was the night Arya disappeared. That's all you really want me to confess, right? And she is surprised when the dad has no idea what she's talking about. And so she comes to the realization that the mother has these suspicions. She knows she wasn't home that night. She thinks she was involved. She's shared this with the pastor, but she didn't ever tell the dad what she thought. And that's kind of where we leave it, where she's still confused because if the dad isn't pushing on this because they don't know where she was the night Arya disappeared, then she's like, then what is he so amped up about that he wants me to confess? So I think in later chapters, we're going to see this conversation kind of sets off a blow up between the parents, which is going to fall out on Beatrix/Sage that she has to deal with. But it also gives us this other sense as the reader that there is still something deeper down, that they are angry, fearful, all kinds of things. What's really pushing their antagonistic behavior towards Sage is still unknown, and she's got to figure that out. It's going to be an important piece of the puzzle. She just doesn't have any indicators yet of what that is. So that's kind of where I'm at finishing up this chapter. I think this was chapter 10. So for chapter 11, we're going to go back to the school. I think I need to bring Kendall back in that's going to be some clues toward what the parents are upset about. And I wasn't quite sure how to approach that before, but I'm getting a better sense. I think I need to use Kendall and use what I set up with him in the beginning of her being uncomfortable with a lot of his attention and physical interactions. That's going to lead the reader in the direction I want them to go if they start understanding why she is on edge with him, but doesn't say anything, doesn't break up with him or speak up or anything like that. So I need to bring Kendall in to pursue that a little bit more and make sure that doesn't get lost in everything else that's going on. So a couple of other things that I made note of that I need to work on this chapter is one thing, kind of building the vocabulary for the world of the investigators. I kept having to look back to see, what did I call this last time? So I was like, was it a soul trap, soul tether? How had I phrased this before? So that was another reason, I don't think I got as many words down, aside from it just being kind of a short scene. I kept having to go back and check on things. What did I call this thing? So I need to nail down my vocabulary for the world of the investigators a little bit more. And then I kept having to look back at the conversation she had with her mom earlier. What did her mom say or not say? And I actually found a few mistakes I had made. I had kind of changed gears in some of the last few chapters from what I'd had on the page from the argument with the mom, with Melinda. So I like where I'm going now better than where I was in that chapter. So I did make a couple quick corrections to that early chapter to match up with what I'm writing now. And then I had debated kind of at the end of that chapter, do I bring the mom in and then extend the chapter? And I may come back to that at some point. Maybe I want the blow up between the two of them to happen right there. But then I wasn't sure where it was going to lead to. And should Beatrix be present? Because if she's present, there's going to be some immediate fallout. and I wasn't sure if I wanted that immediate fallout. I think I need to think on the mom and dad as characters in the story a little bit more. When I first started writing the interaction between Beatrix/Sage and her dad, I'd had him getting worked up and he becomes physically aggressive when he kind of blows up at her, and I have him slap her. Which, when I went back to check the conversation with the mom, I was looking to see exactly what her wording has been. I realized, like, I had that same scene with the mom, like the mom slapped her. And so I was like, well, I need the dad to be more distinct and unique in his approach and what kind of triggers him. So I did still have him get physically aggressive with her, but instead of a slap, which I think tends to be a little bit more of a female reaction, what he ends up doing is kind of grabbing her arm and spinning her around and kind of pinning her against the door. And he kind of makes this comment to her of like, oh, if you don't like what this feels like, just imagine, what you're going to be put through in hell when you get there. Being confined, being tortured, being all of those terrible things that we think of when we picture that version of hell. So I think I may make a note to myself to maybe come back and bring in the mom at the end and have that confrontation between the two of them at that point. But I need to sit with these characters a little bit longer and see how I think they're going to react to each other. What is going to be the thing that they get most angry at each other over? Is the dad mad because she withheld something from him? Or is he mad that she told the pastor but not him? I guess I'm just not sure totally what's the blow up going to be over in its most pared down sense, and how is the fallout going to land on Sage that then Beatrix has to deal with and live under. Because I need Beatrix to still be able to move about, go investigate things, and have enough freedom to complete the case and not have the parents locking her down too much, which I think I may have to stretch kind of the level of believability on that, because that probably would be the reaction, really, ground her, take away her keys, that sort of thing. I need her to still be somewhat free to move around and get things done in order for her to complete this case. So still pondering on that. We'll see by the time I get back to writing whether I continue with this chapter or just leave it as is. I'm going to be thinking on it a bit in between writing sessions. But that's kind of where I'm wrapping the week up at. So my total at this point is 17,177 words. And I'll be starting in on chapter 11 next, thinking about where I'm going to go unless I go back and do some more with chapter 10. We'll see. But a week of writing done. I've got some more words on the page a little bit further into this project, getting some stuff figured out. I'm realizing where I still need to spend some time, like building up the world of the investigators a little bit more in my mind. I may just spend a little time thinking about that and making some notes as well to kind of guide me as I move forward. I will be back next week. Thank you guys for hanging out and listening to my writing ramblings. And if you have thoughts or comments, always happy to hear them. If you want to find out more about my other projects, things that I've actually already published and finished, you can find me online at delsheriegladden.com. All right, I'll be back next week.